We've got a video from another speaker who's basically got a video for this portion of smart contract discussion. And speaker's Adam Vaziri, and he's a co-founder of Chain of Things.
And give it at the end an example of how we I'll also comment a little bit on how innovation is happening within blockchain in general, and how that may or may not affect in industry and encourage that industry to change. So let's start off by what are bills of lading, and then move through to some of the problems in the industry, and then where blockchain at a high level can provide a solution, and then onto the kind of how that can be integrated into the industry. But first of all, bills of lading, as you all know, are legal documents. They consist of documents of title. They are also receipts. They evidence that the carrier has received certain goods. And they are also a shipping contract. They state the terms of carriage in relation to goods. Now, the problem, as you well are aware, with the current system is that it has a lot of theft, bills of lading, and fraud in relation to bills of lading. This is a particular issue in respect of bills of lading, as bills of lading are a title document. It means, in very simple terms, that possession of the bill of lading signals to other people that you are the legal owner of the goods. So as a result, if I illegitimately take possession of bills of lading, then I can claim to others that I have title over the goods, which is a problem. Then we have the bill of lading as a paper-based document. It is usually produced in 3 original copies, which moves around the world depending on where the goods are being shipped. This creates, obviously, inefficiency and an excess of administration. And I would argue, which I'll demonstrate a little bit later in this talk, that there is an excess of administration in relation to what happens when things go wrong. When something goes wrong, it needs to go to arbitration, it needs to go to the court system, it requires enforcement, and enforcement is not cheap. And that obviously adds more bulk into the industry itself, an additional layer of administration. So let's look at one thing within that problem set, which is the fact that these are paper-based documents. Now, it's obvious that if the cause of the inefficiency relates to paper-based documents, it's logical to say that all we need to do is remove the paper. So naturally, we would think that digitization is a way of improving efficiency in shipping. However, there are a few issues about digitization. One is it is extremely easy to duplicate digital files. And in addition to that, in order to convert people from a physical environment to a digital one, it requires the whole industry to buy in, because there is no point redrafting bill of lading a digital document if no one else deems it to be legally valid. On duplication, we know that the digital world has made copyright enforcement almost impossible. There is nothing, apart from the law itself, that stops copying or tampering with a digital file. So, in actual fact, if you go digital and you'll end up increasing the potential falsification. And therefore you'll be creating actually an additional challenge for yourself. So rather than having physical forgery of documents, you end up with digital forgery of documents, which could actually be even worse because it's more scalable. So one innovation at a very high level that came with blockchain technology is the ability to create a digital file that is not duplicated, cannot be duplicated, and cannot be changed. Now, if you take the words of Eric Schmidt, ex-CEO of Google, he said that Bitcoin is a remarkable cryptographic achievement and has the ability to create something that is not duplicable in the digital world has enormous value. So his reaction to Bitcoin was not to say, oh, this is a fantastic payment system. He is really saying that it's an innovation in the digital world by creating something unique and not duplicable. So it leads me to believe, or leads other people to believe, if you were to fuse blockchain technology and bills of lading, you would expect that the blockchain-based bill of lading would not be duplicable, and yet at the same time it is digital. Now that would of course lead to some efficiency gains, and maybe the fact that blockchain technology can lead to non-duplicable bills of lading, that can help tip the industry to go digital and alleviate the industry itself on paper-based processes. However, we should not underestimate existing industry conventions. Shipping industry is not a young industry, and it's not because technology is particularly good or efficient and necessarily would be adopted by everyone. It takes, as I'm sure you're aware, a whole industry to come together to decide to change its ways, conventions. And oftentimes we see that industries change because of regulation, so policy and top-down approach. Other times it can be from the threat of disruption. Now with Bitcoin, you could say that today, 7 years since it was created, the legacy financial system has actually recognized the threat of its decentralized payment system. So the legacy financial system is reacting to the threat of disruption. Why? Well, it's not because Bitcoin is particularly efficient. Obviously, it will not have the same throughput of MasterCard transactions. It is simply because Bitcoin operates without the need for a banking system or card network, or for that matter, any central administrator. And the fact is, it works. And as a result of it working, it is now presented as a real alternative to the legacy financial system. And as a result, it is effectively a thorn in the side of the financial system. Now, from my point of view at least, from observing the space as a blockchain lawyer for about 4 years now, my understanding is that the financial ecosystem is reacting to this alternative, which is Bitcoin, in a way to preserve itself. To a certain degree, there are other arguments. Obviously, there's the innate ability within Bitcoin that they want to leverage for other applications in an abstract way. But I think it is also a reaction to the fact that there is now a true alternative. And a lot of investment has gone into these institutions and the whole industry now rallying behind blockchain as the fabric layer for the new financial system. So threat-based innovation is hardly the ideal way of innovating in an industry, but it is having a fantastic effect, at least within financial services. And who would have thought that today 70 odd banks in the world are now exploring together how blockchain technology can be used across the whole of the financial industry. Obviously, it's easy to say, well, what about the shipping industry? I would say part of the purpose of us doing this event for you during Shipping Week is for the shipping industry to consider proactively, not reactively, about their future and the impact of these technologies. So let's not dwell on this too much, but let's look at more at what blockchain can do. So we've seen before that we've seen before that it innovates in relation to non-falsified bills of lading. That's just the beginning, and is the tip of the iceberg. The real potential for blockchain technology in shipping is to automate contractual obligations. To identify how that might be possible, we need to acknowledge also a separate trend that is happening at the moment in shipping, which is IoT. IoT, as what you even acknowledge, is going to revolutionize shipping. Now, I didn't do the numbers here, other people have, and one report, Cisco DHL report, mentions that end consumers are asking for detailed shipment tracking to have transparency in real time, and that business customers are asking for integrity control, especially for sensitive goods. So in summary, according to Cisco and DHL, they expect that IoT will provide the next generation of track and trace, faster, more accurate, predictive. So I would say that one of the main drivers for IoT in shipping at the moment comes from this need for increasing monitoring of the shipment and the quality of goods in transit. But I would say, what is the use of monitoring all these goods in transit if the tools for enforcement are not up to scratch? What happens when, yes, because of IoT, you now identify that there's breach of contract, that goods haven't been shipped in a way that they should have? Well, you now have to revert back to the traditional mechanisms at your disposal for enforcing that contract. So if you want restitution, i.e. you put back into the position before you entered into the contract, we're now going to need to go through the legal system, the court system, which means, as I said above, administration, and it means expense. And so if you look at that, you can say, because enforcing rights costs money, people now have to make an economic decision when considering whether they want to enforce their rights or not. If it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, delays, uncertainty in the outcome to enforce a shipment for $10,000 in value, then would you enforce your rights? Probably not. So I would say that part of the inefficiency in shipping is actually the lack of cost-effective enforcement mechanisms. So in the same way that IoT makes early detection of contractual breaches easier to spot, we believe that blockchain can reduce the cost of enforcing shipping contracts. We actually postulate that today there is a role for blockchain and IoT combined in shipping contracts. And here is where we see that possibility. In particular, where the costs of enforcement are higher in value than the goods themselves. So low-value shipments, in our view, will be a perfect area to begin experimenting with blockchain and IoT. So let's look at how blockchain technology can reduce those costs of enforcement. Blockchain technology offers the ability to draft what is known as smart contracts. Smart contracts themselves were invented in the 1990s by Diacle, And he referred to them as a computerized transaction protocol that executes the terms of a contract. So the key point is computers that execute terms of a contract. In essence, you could say it's a contract that has teeth and that it's effective. Because a contract is only actually worth the paper it's written on if you can enforce those rights. And as we said before, above, it's not always feasible to enforce your rights. So with the smart contract, where the enforcement comes from computers, not human beings, there is no need to rely on the ability of one particular person to enforce the terms of the contract. It's the computer that does it. And so, if that is the case, then if computers are enforcing the terms of the contract, you no longer need trust between the parties for the system to function. And that's why blockchains are commonly referred to as trustless environments. In a blockchain environment, there is no need for anyone to trust each other. Whereas if you look at, for instance, the shipping industry, a lot of relationships, commercial relationships, are based on trust. The maritime industry, possibly the insurance industry and the Lloyd's industry, is based upon the trust in that person's ability and creditworthiness to deliver their side of the bargain. And as we mentioned earlier, because enforcement is actually a relative concept, it really depends on your financial resources in order to enforce, you're most likely to transact with people that you trust. Whereas the blockchain as this intermediary, the code as the intermediary, people no longer need to trust each other to transact. Well, that's all very well and good in principle, and these are great high values. But what tools are available today? With blockchain technology, the tools available are available today, to write smart contracts. This is not something in the future. It is something today that you can build and deliver. Now, I wouldn't say Bitcoin is necessarily the best place to be writing smart contracts. There are ways, but it was not designed with that in mind. At least the Bitcoin protocol itself and the blockchain behind it. It was designed as a decentralized payment system that was designed also as a Nakamoto. However, Ethereum, which is newer protocol, and here I'm just giving this as an example, because there's also obviously Hyperledger, which you may be aware of. But Ethereum was designed with complex smart contracts in mind. The key feature of Ethereum is that it is what's known as Turing complete. This means it's like you can program pretty much anything on it. I guess an analogy to draw is from going to program a calculator to do certain functions to programming with a real computer. So you can code just about anything with a smart contract. And in relation to shipping, it is perfectly feasible today in Ethereum to have a smart shipping contract, or smart bill of lading. This is an example. In this example, which we're giving here, the notion here is that the carrier of the goods, for instance Diacle, and the seller of the goods, they enter into a contract, a shipping contract, which is obviously appended to the labelling, to carry the goods to the buyer of the goods. And in that contract, the carrier needs to adhere to certain conditions. And let's say, for instance, that the goods in question are wine, and that they must be stored below 20 degrees, or let's say, or below 30 degrees, not above 30 degrees. And that if the shipper in transit allows the goods in the container to go above 30 degrees, then the goods are destroyed, which means breach of contract. So, obviously, under normal circumstances, they'll sign a bit of lading, and then the buyer will receive goods. And maybe they're opening the wine bottles. And when they do open the wine bottles, maybe a few years in advance, they realise that the goods are spoiled. Then now the buyer takes action against the seller, and the seller takes action against the shipper, carrier. And that's all done through the legal processes. But if it's only 1,000 bottles of wine that are fairly inexpensive, let's say, will the buyer want to enforce? Will the seller want to enforce against the carrier? So in this instance, we're just taking the example of value of goods where the value of the goods are relatively low and that the cost of enforcement is fairly high. So in this instance, we're saying that carrier would, if you want to deposit into a smart contract, and then would deposit cryptocurrency into that smart contract. Now, here I'm giving the example of a public blockchain and what you can do today with the Ethereum blockchain. You could obviously do this on a private blockchain if you so wish. And so they would agree that in transit, temperature should not go below 30 degrees. That would be a recorded state within the Ethereum smart contract. And if that state were to change, i.e. go above 30 degrees, so go from acceptable to unacceptable, then the penalty would be paid to the seller, and the penalty would equate to the deposit amount. So let's combine that with IoT now. If you have within the container a sensor device, which is quite common now these days, which is recording the temperature and humidity, for instance, within the container. It's recording the temperature. It relays that data to the smart contract on a blockchain. And the smart contract just records the data as it's coming in. When the data shows that it's above 30 degrees inside the container, then the state changes from acceptable to unacceptable. At the point of the state change happening, the penalty paid to the state goods. So the reason that's interesting is because, as we said, the definition was provided by Nixabo, the terms of the contract self-execute, and the agent, if you want, the auditor, is the sensor device inside the container. The contract self-executes based on the data provided by that sensor. And you'll see later, I'm Adam Vaziri, my colleague Adam Vaziri, he will demonstrate one of our sensor devices that is communicating with the blockchain. So as you can see, by using smart contracts in this instance, there would be no need for an arbitrator. There would be no need, in fact, for a court system. Just a piece of computer code signed by the parties, an IoT sensor device with cryptocurrency deposit made by the carrier. Now, you may say to me, well, that's all very well and good, but I can go inside the container and place my hand on the sensor device and suddenly it'll be 30 degrees and game the system. So maybe you can begin, let's say, until the sensors are intelligent enough to identify whether they've been tampered with. You could design a smart contract in mind where the smart contract initiates the payment, but it has to be verified by a third party before the seller receives the funds. So it's a counter signature if the payment is received. So that could be done, for instance, with an order type. So there you go. Those are just a few examples of what can be done today using smart contract protocol, actually Ethereum and shipping. And the utility of this is to address the problem of administering, enforcing shipping contracts, which is expensive. And we see the actual role of blockchain technology and smart contracts and shipping to address, in particular, low-value shipment of goods, the cost of enforcement much higher than value of goods. We see that as a great entry point for blockchain AT. But really, to unleash this potential within blockchain technology, it requires your experience as an industry, your know-how, and to a certain extent, your infrastructure, to allow these technologies to lead ahead. I suspect that the shipping industry may, like the financial industry, react to blockchain in the same way. When other people initiate protocols for the transfer of goods without intermediaries, then at that point, let's say the disruption paradigm will start to affect the shipping industry in the same way that it's done now in the financial industry. But I would suggest, rather than waiting for the inevitable, to be proactive now as an industry to come together to form a consortium and to explore these use cases using smart contracts. Thank you for your attention.
Do you have any questions about his presentation? Yep.
Sorry, I'm very new to this thing, so I may ask silly questions, but
No silly questions.
let's assume you did an example of the container full of wines, and during the transportation, the temperature inside the container was over 30 degrees, and the data log inside the container registered the temperature well over 30 degrees. And then arrives at the destination, and then the client says, sorry, the goods are spoiled, they're compromised because we received this data from the sensor inside. And then it starts a dispute, which theoretically, according to what he said, is very quick. Because the client says, you see, I didn't say anything, the data log tells us that the temperature is very high. And the lawyer, according to his thesis, says, yes, you're right, so we're going to pay you the money for it. Is it really going to happen like that, or the lawyer is going to say, the data log was false?
I think you still need a real world component to resolve disputes with smart contracts. And the way I see it working is, okay, there are conditions in the contract, and if the sensor data can be transmitted in real time to a certain degree, depending on whether it's over satellite or when before the port it gets ported. It depends on what kind of communication it's using, right? So when there's a violation of that contract, the contract is in breach, right? So let's say there's a dispute at the other end. There's some resolution of that as in real time. But if there's a dispute, like contracts today, you can rely on the arbitration system that already exists in the world. A lot of contracts have arbitration clauses. And in blockchain, and in smart contracts with blockchain, there's a lot of talk about oracles, which are essentially can be human, they're agents. So they can be human, they can be device, and they can be software. So there's a human component still to this, and that arbitrator system that is involved could be brought into that system, into the smart contract system. So, any other questions? Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Sure.
So, in the event that there's a breach of contract based on the evidence provided by the IoT device, how do you prove that the IoT device is not defective?
Obviously, that's the same issue. Is that you would have to, if it goes to a dispute. Now, are you going to dispute a small value cargo? So it depends. If it's a higher value cargo, maybe you would dispute and want to check on the IoT device. But the same thing is what Chain of Things is trying to do, is be able to create a system where devices are audited in real time, because we create a reputation for the device on the blockchain. So identity and a reputation.
Sure.
They actually trying to remove the lawyer, they're actually saying remove the lawyer.
Yeah, if there's a major dispute, obviously it depends on the value of the, you can't completely remove the arbitrator or lawyers. I think you'll find it actually reduces the amount of legal work that, say, these three guys that are up here, they're doing for small claims. So, I mean, this guy's a lawyer, he kind of knows what he's talking about as well. Joseph?
Yeah. This is just,
I can already know what you're going to ask.
well, but this is just actually practical experience on how the technology is used. Is that, I've actually tried to use blockchain to trade, and you actually don't want money to be moved automatically. So the usefulness of blockchain in this situation is that you have a monitor on the freight, on the cargo ship. It can actually be in the middle of the Indian Ocean and not transmit. The moment that the cargo opens up, it transmits all the data to a central database. If you can think of the blockchain as a central database. Now, at that point, it's a lot easier if you don't automate the flow of monies. You have all this information that's in a central database, and then human beings look over and figure out what happens next. But I think one of the things that I found from my personal experience is that blockchain is really, really useful as sensor moving information to a data store, and you actually don't want to automatically move money, because once you automatically move money, you want a human being to manually move the money, and it's just data on the cloud, and that's where this technology shines.
Any other questions? Okay.
In regards to the ownership of the data, because it is all decentralized, so some sort of no ownership, right?
Well, the data from the device is owned by.
Let's say the smart contract as an example, right? So it is on the blockchain, basically it is public.
It doesn't need to be public. It can be private.
Private. So if it is an issue related with the code or with the smart contract, who is the party, against whom you can sue or take legal action?
Just like in any other contract. So it's what's in the contract, what are the conditions of the contract. So, obviously, if it's the IoT system that's involved, is it the person, his company owns the container, the charter. It could be. The thing is, from a sort of top-down view, if you go talk to Diacle about this, insurers, if they can see that the risk, they reduce the risk by adopting the system, then there's better chances of actually working.
We've actually run into this problem with the IP. The problem is, okay, this is a not very well developed period of law, because you have certain contractual, the way that lawyers do contracts is they just draft the contracts and they don't care too much about the IP. So you've got a collision between the way that lawyers treat IP and computer programmers treat IP, right? And so the way that we've actually done this with the smart contracts we've written is that we've open sourced all the contracts. We've had everybody who writes the contracts sign a release, a copyright release saying that these contracts are open and available to everybody, because that gets around the IP problems. Now, around the liability of what happens if a contract goes wrong, then you're not an IP law, you're in, it's best if you don't think of the contracts as a contract, you think of a contract as a machine. And so let's suppose the machine,
Software.
yeah, let's suppose the machine, and this is why I hate the word smart contracts, because it's more automatic vending machines. So you imagine that a vending machine destroys the cargo. At that point, you use the legal principles for that, and it's better to go in that sort of situation than to call them smart contracts, because then you use the wrong body of law, essentially.
Okay, we're going to have to move on to the next presentation because we have time.